Sixth grade mathematicians, we're getting ready for our test on Friday. Our test is on ratios, rates, and percents. We're going to be covering what we've covered this week. The first thing I want to talk to you is about some rates. So I have here on the board some rates that I've written down for a problem. And let's just say I had a problem that said I had 6 kids in my room that were getting for the pep rally. 4 of them were in orange shirts and 2 of them were in black shirts. I could compare these kids a lot of different ways. I could say that I had 4 orange shirts to 6 total shirts. I could say I have 2 black shirts to 6 total shirts. I could also say I have 4 orange shirts to 2 black shirts. So I need to make sure that when the question is being asked, I know what the question is about because I could pull a lot of information from here. I also know that I would not want to simplify these ratios because even though it is true that I have 2 orange shirts per every, that looks like 20, but that's actually orange, 2 orange shirts for every 3 shirts, and 1 black shirt for every 3 shirts, I don't really have 2 kids in orange and 1 kid in black. What I have is 4 kids in orange and 2 kids in black. So I want to make sure that I'm only simplifying if I'm supposed to be simplifying, and I want to make sure I know what my question is asking me, whether I'm comparing across or whether I'm comparing up and down. So using this same ratio of 4 orange shirts to 6 total shirts, what if I now went to the pep rally and I counted all the shirts at the pep rally, and I saw that at our pep rally we had 120 shirts total. And out of those 120 shirts, I want to know how many of them are orange. How would I figure that out? Well, first of all, I want to set it up as a ratio and keep the same labels together. So if the shirts are on the bottom here, I need the shirts on the bottom here. If the orange is on the top here, I need the orange on the top there. And then I'm going to say, what times 6 makes 120? Well, 6 times 2 makes 12. So I know 6 times 20 makes 120. And then whatever I do to the bottom, I'm going to do to the top as well. So I know that I'm going to have 80 orange shirts because 4 times 20 is 80. So if I have 120 shirts, I'm going to have 80 of them orange. And that's how I'm going to figure out my ratios. Whatever I do to the bottom, I always do the top. Keep it in harmony so that you don't have it changing shape as you go along. You always want to do the same thing to the top as the bottom, just like equivalent fractions. You're also going to have a problem with a recipe that's just like the shirt question. Just make sure whatever you do, you always write down your ratios. If I know that my recipe is calling for 2 lemons for every 6 tablespoons of sugar, and I want to change this to 4 lemons, then I need to say, well, 2 times 2 is 4, and 6 times 2 is 12, so it's going to be 12 tablespoons of sugar. Make sure whatever I do to one, I do to the other, and it's a lot easier if you write it as a fraction than just trying to do it in your head. Make sure you write it down so that you can get it. Another thing that you're going to see on your test is talking about additive and multiplicative patterns. So remember we said that when you're graphing an additive pattern, it's always going to go through the y-axis. So it might go through the y-axis on the negative side, it might go through on the positive side, but it's always going to cross the y-axis. So I'm going to write add right there. But on a multiplicative pattern, it's going to go through the point of origin because anything times 0 is 0, so it doesn't matter what my multiplying factor is, it's always going to give me 0 when I have 0 as my x. You're also going to have some questions about quantitative and qualitative. Remember we said that quantitative has to do with an amount. So when we're talking about amount, more or less, that is going to be a quantitative question. Qualitative is going to have to do with the quality of something. And so when we're looking at how good something is, like how good we did on a test, or how much something costs compared to something else. We're looking at what percent of students won a game. Those would all be qualitative kind of questions, and they're different than quantitative. So the quantitative has to do with how much, qualitative has to do with how good or the quality. And then the last couple questions, we've got a ratio question. We have a percent question. You remember that we worked Thursday or Wednesday actually on percents, and we talked about wholes and zeros and halves. Remember that if you have a whole percent, it's always going to be 100% of whatever it is. So 100% of 6 is 6. 100% of 8 is 8. If you're dealing halves, 100% of 10, 100% of 10 is 10. 50% of 10 would be 5. 50% of 100 would be 50. 50% of 22 would be 11. No matter what you're doing in half, that would be 50. And then the same thing with fourths. So if you do 25%, it would be divided by 4. So 25% of 4 would be 1. 25% of 20 would be 5, et cetera, et cetera. So that's how you're going to do your percent question. Your last question has to do with your additive pattern again. You have some, remember that when you have multiplicative, it would be something like y equals 2x. That would be a multiplicative. And the additive would be more like y equals x plus 2 would be an additive pattern. So you're going to be looking and seeing which one is which, and it's just going to give you some examples in words, and you have to find them in your sentences. I already talked to you about your percents. And then your last one is a decimal. And remember, we said that with our fractions, something like 1/2, if I want to know what 1/2 is as a decimal, I make my diving board, I dive my 1 off, and I divide it by 2. I'm going to have to add my point, make that into a 10, and 2 times 5 is 10. So 1/2 equals 0.5. All right, that is basically your test. You have 11 questions on it. I think you should do really, really good as long as you take your time. So what I want you to do is I want you to write some stuff down on your paper so you're successful on your test. Okay, guys, so this is what I want you to write on your paper. First, I made a little miniature graph. I just made a bar this way and a bar that way. And then I went across the y-axis and I wrote additive or add. And across the origin, I wrote MULT for multiplicative. So that's going to kind of help us with our additive and multiplicative. I also wrote quantitative is more or less, and qualitative is better. And then the last thing I wrote is ratios keep the same. And that just simply means whatever I do to one part of the ratio, I have to do to the other part of the ratio. What I want you to do is take and write all of these down on your paper. And then if I were you, when I got ready to do my test, I would write this with dry erase marker on my desk so that I had this to look at. You're going to have 2 questions about this. You're going to have 1 question about that. That's already 3 of your questions that you have your answer on your paper if you write it down. And ratios is just really important to remember. You're going to keep them the same. Whatever you do to one number, you have to do to the other number. Good luck on your test.